What's up, gang? Welcome to The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius and Howard. I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now listen, The Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, moi, as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. Guys, welcome to today's episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius and Howard, and boy, do we have a special guest. Howard Behar is in the house. Howard, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great today. Beautiful day here in Palm Springs.
Oh, man, I'm so jealous. Palm Springs in January. It's like heaven on earth.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Exactly.
Oh, man. So long time coming. We've been in communication for a few months now, but we got Howard here to share his massive amount of wisdom to our audience. Howard, here at the Greatest Machine, I always like to tell the audience like how I stumble upon our guests, and maybe for those who are not familiar with your work, Howard, number one, was the former president of Starbucks Coffee Company, and he was a guest on a friend of our show, Hala Taha, and I saw the episode, and I'm like, oh, I want to get Howard on our show. So the team reached out, and you're so gracious to agree to come on the show. One of the things you did that I loved and I appreciate is Howard wanted to have a conversation beforehand. Not a lot of guests do that, by the way. You might be surprised, but you're probably, I think, out of everyone I've ever done the show with, there's probably 3 or 4 people. So you're and I've now interviewed about 400 or 500 people. So you're in the 1%.
Good. That's all right.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Do you do that just so you're like, hey, see if it's a fit? Is that one of the reasons you do that?
I want you have an audience. I want to make sure that I believe that I add value, because just doing something and not adding value is not how I want to live my life. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Well, so look, here at the Greatness Machine, we love origin stories, and I love to give formal bios. So I mentioned earlier that Howard is the retired president of Starbucks Coffee Company. He was on the board of directors for 12 years, author of 2 books, It's Not About the Coffee and The Magic Cup. And he oversaw the company when they grew from 28 stores to over 15,000, spanning 5 continents. So that's just a crazy amount of growth and probably a wild ride. And we're really excited to hear more about it. But, like I mentioned earlier, we love origin stories here at the Greatness Machine. Most people don't wake up and they're just the president of Starbucks. They got to work their way from somewhere to there. Would love to hear some of your origin story. How did you get to where you got to, Howard?
Oh, because of my dad. My mom, both my parents were immigrants in the early 1900s. Seattle, my dad couldn't speak the language, but saved his pennies, nickels, and dimes and opened up a small mom and pop grocery store. And so I started in retail from the time I was born. I was in that store almost every day. As I went to school, I'd go to the store after school. And so I watched a guy build, basically it was a small business. That's all it ever was, but it served the neighborhood. And he always said, these aren't our customers, they're our neighbors and our friends. And so I watched him do that, and I latched on to, his values and my mother's values. And, over time, I became a conscious competent at retail and consumer products. And one day I ended up at Starbucks. It was a long story, but it was all bits and pieces put together. And along that way, I decided I wanted to become what I didn't know was become a servant leader. I never had heard those words until I'd read a little pamphlet by Robert Greenleaf. And so I tried to become a conscious, competent servant leadership, and that served me well throughout my career and certainly into Starbucks.
So where did your folks immigrate from?
My dad was from Bulgaria. My dad was actually born in 1895. He'd be 129 this year, or 130 this year. And my mother came from Latvia, and she was born in 1909. So they're both been gone for a long time. My dad's been gone for over 50 years. Wow.
My grandfather was born in 1899. Which is, and I'm 46 years old. So my father was the youngest of 5, and he was born in 39. So,
Yeah.
so it's you don't hear a lot of people whose family who have lineage to the 1800s these days that are only like one generation removed.
Yeah.
So that's
right.
That's interesting. And so did your folks move to Seattle from Europe?
Yeah, my father moved to Seattle from Bulgaria. He had a brother that was living in Vancouver, BC, and then they both immigrated to Seattle. And my mother came from Latvia directly to Seattle. Had family. My mother was from a family of 13 children. 11 of them made it to Seattle, and she was the youngest of those 11 that made it here. My dad was from 8 children, and he was the youngest, but his brother was the oldest.
So your mom was Latvian. Did she move here? Like what year did she move here? Her family moved here?
1917, right at the Russian Revolution. Yeah.
Yeah.
And all the rest of her family had come, and they kept like they did, the immigrants would send for the other parts of their family. And so my mother and her parents were the last ones to come, and a brother were the last ones to come out of the 11 kids.
So, and your mom was born in Latvia then, is that correct?
Yeah, right.
And your father, so both your parents were immigrants. Interesting.
Yeah.
My dad was from Iran. He was an immigrant.
Yeah.
It's interesting growing up. I grew up as an immigrant with immigrant parents. I was born in the United States, but I grew up with an immigrant dad and a one generation removed immigrant mom. Her dad was her parents from Italy, but I think it gives you a different perspective on like how much you can appreciate what this country has to offer.
Yeah, no question about it. They lived through the Depression. They lived without any money, couldn't speak the language, figured it out. They figured it out. Were they rich? No, but they were rich in so many other ways. Strong family and caring in the things that they did. It was amazing to watch and be part of it.
So obviously you grew up in a family with the parents that were entrepreneurs. You grew up serving a community in the retail business. It looks like you obviously transitioned to corporate America, but how did you end up getting into the coffee business? Would love to hear about that.
I was president of a land development company that got in trouble. We were in outdoor recreational land, and we had to sell the company, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I said, I'm going to go back to my roots. I'm going to find a small business to buy. Primarily, it was either in retail, but some kind of consumer goods. And along that journey, I had a friend who was one of the co-founders of Costco, a guy named Jeff Brotman. And Jeff was on the board of this little coffee company called Starbucks when they had 5 or 6 stores. And he was helping Howard Schultz, who was kind of the modern day founder of Starbucks. And Jeff said, geez, they could use a guy like you there, And I said, well, I really want my own business. And he says, I want you to talk to Howard. So I did. And, we sat down for breakfast, and he was looking for a VP of operation. At that time, they had 11 stores. By the time I got there were 28. But, and so we talked, and he had a list of criteria. First, he wanted somebody with a college degree. I didn't have that. Second, he wanted somebody with food service background. Finally, we got down to I didn't have that. Finally, we got down to number 10. Can you breathe? Yes, I could breathe, but that wasn't enough to get me over the hump with Howard. And I wasn't that interested. I really wanted my own business. Well, a year passed, and by accident, I met Howard again through a guy that I knew that was helping me try to buy a business. And Howard and I met again, and he hadn't hired anybody, and I hadn't bought a business yet. And so I said, why don't you let me work in the company for a week for free? You look at me, I'll look at you, company. And at the end of that week, if there's something, we'll have a conversation. And so that's what I did. I worked in the trucks. I worked in the roasting plant. I worked in the stores. At the end of that week, I kind of fell in love. And fortunately, Howard extended me an offer to join Starbucks. And the rest is history.
So when you first started talking to him, there was 11 stores. How long did it take from that first conversation to when you actually took the job?
Over a year.
Okay, so in that year they grew by 2.5x almost. That's crazy. Yeah. Okay, so they were growing like crazy.
Yeah, they were growing.
That's all. That's a lot of stores to open.
Yeah.
Did he have financial backers back then, or was he?
By the time I got to him, he had raised money in the local community to buy Starbucks. He was an employee of Starbucks.
That's right.
He went out on his own, and then the founders of Starbucks said, do you want to buy Starbucks? So he went city of Seattle, and all the locals put up the little bits and pieces of money, and he was able to buy it. So by that time, he had some money, but we were just at the beginning of raising venture money when I got there.
Yeah, I'd read the story that basically the founders of Starbucks bought Pete's Coffee,
That's
and then
correct. Yeah,
he bought Starbucks from
yeah,
them.
yeah, right.
After he had this like Italian, espresso,
Yeah,
cafe idea that they didn't like.
yeah.
So yeah, I read that story. That's so interesting. So, and so when you got there, how many employees did they have when you first got there?
A couple hundred maybe.
Okay, so it was a small business.
By the time I left, there were 250,000.
Wow. Let me ask you a question, because first of all, I think the human brain, there's a lot of studies around this, has a really difficult time thinking exponentially, right? And when you go from a couple hundred to a couple 100,000, that's an exponential growth
Yes,
size.
right.
When you're along for that ride,
Yeah.
How would you describe that ride? I'm curious.
Fast and furious, and it was incredible. But we figured out a model that worked, and we knew we had to raise a lot of money. We did that, and we knew that people were going to make the business grow. And so we were constantly recruiting people into the organization. I mean, I spent half my time doing that, bringing people into the organization, sourcing and bringing them in, and recruiting to open stores, to build the models. It wasn't just retail. I mean, we had roasting plants we were building. We had other businesses. We had a wholesale business, So we were growing in a lot of different ways at that time. But it's always about the people, If you bring good people into the organization, they're the ones that do the work. Howard and I didn't do it. There was a third leg of the stool, a guy named Warren Smith, who came in as a chief financial officer just about 6 months after I came in as the operator. And so it was really about getting people on board and then letting those people fly. I have a saying that says the person who sweeps the floor should choose the broom. And what I meant by that is you bring great people in, you got to get them on board with the vision and the mission of the organization and the greater purpose of the organization, then let them fly. That's why you brought them on, because they brought something of value. And so that's what we did. And we were just recruiting. Didn't make any difference where we needed somebody at that particular time. We were recruiting anyway.
So when you're growing like that, I've grown a business from a startup to about 1,000 employees, which is obviously much smaller than
1,000 big. Yeah.
Yeah. It was quite a ride. It was a very short. We did it in 3 years.
Yeah.
And then the business, it was a very cyclical industry, so the business ended up actually shrinking and then grew again. But one of the things I realized, and I'm a person that I hate firing people. The thought of terminating someone, it gets me really sick to my stomach. I fret about it for weeks. It's
anybody that's a human being has trouble with that.
Yeah. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do everything first of all, I'm going to hire slow. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to do tons of reference checks. I'm going to have the whole team meet them. I'm going to do all the things my due diligence is going to be like nothing you've ever seen. Right.
Yeah. Right.
And what I found was, even then, they were nice people, and they were great at what they were great at, but sometimes it didn't work for what the business was. And what I would find is I told folks, I'm like, even 1 out of 3 times I still get it wrong, even when I do all that work.
Oh yeah, I used to say it's half the time you get it wrong, and I don't care how much research you do. I mean, it's not 100% wrong, but not what you expected. And so that's just part of the deal. That's why it's so important to grow people from within. Better to deal with the people that you know than the people you don't know.
What it was what when you guys were growing like that, how did you maintain? I mean, especially growing at that speed, there's a lot of you're going to have, if half the people don't work out, you're going to have a fair amount of turnover, right?
Yeah. Right.
But you're trying to maintain a strong culture, because if it's all about the people, and when people see other people leave, that hurts the culture. How did you guys manage that? What was the process?
Well, it wasn't that the people were leaving so quickly. They'd come in, before you figure out that somebody might not be the perfect fit, it's a year, about. Sometimes it's sooner than that, but it takes time. And so, we were having turnover, but most of our turnover was at the store level because of the nature of the business.
Got it.
The people in the support center, we weren't having nearly as much turnover. So the leadership wasn't turning over like like maybe the store baristas were at that time. But even then, we had low turnover for the kind of business that we had. We had about 50, 60% turnover at the stores. Typical quick service restaurants have over 200%. So
Wow.
people were sticking, and the leadership was sticking, and we had a big dream and a big purpose, and people attached to it, and they wanted to become part of it. And I always say like attracts like. So after a while, people would understand what we were about, and those people were attracted to come in. And of course, the people that were working there were our greatest salespeople in terms of bringing new people in. So that was going on all the time. All of us were recruiting.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so when you guys were growing like that, was there moments where, like, when you start thinking about that level of growth, where you're growing from, a few hundred people even to a few thousand people, it sounds like that must happen very quickly.
Yeah, it did.
And I think that, having grown a business to 1,000 people, I said, I think if you get to 1,000, I think you get to a couple thousand or a few thousand, because you built I call it scaffolding. The scaffolding's there, and it can handle that. I used to joke. I said, 1,000-person organization is really just 100 groups of 10, right?
Yeah, right.
And so you got to build the systems to manage those pods of 10, and that's kind of what a little.
That's maybe what you do, and that's about the right number too.
Yeah,
because you have 10 stores per district manager.
Yeah, I think once you go beyond that, then it gets a little overwhelming for whoever's managing it, right?
Yeah, right.
And so when you guys were growing like that, I mean, obviously it's a massive, Starbucks is a massive success story. You guys brought in great talent. When you start to think of, was it a situation, and maybe you already answered the question, where you're like, well, Darius, we didn't know how to build a 10,000 or 20,000 person organization or 15,000 because we never done it before. So we just brought in great people and they figured it out. How did that work?
That's it. That was it right there. We would bring big people. I'd call people that had done it before to get coaching, mistakes they'd made, what I should watch out for. And we just did it. And we hired people that had a lot more experience than I did at doing it. And, but we just believed that we could do it. And we created a model that was expandable and replicable, and that's what we did. And we made lots of mistakes along the way, but we overcame the mistakes. We dealt with them honestly and openly, and we moved forward. And you don't have the answers. Nobody has the answers. It's the nature of people. If you're willing to grow, you're willing to learn. Then it's amazing what you can accomplish, and that's what we did.
When you start to
it was a fast track. I'm not telling you, look, I was working 60, 70 hours a week, and I was traveling all the time. I was looking at real estate, we're hiring people, all the things, lots of issues we had to solve, but we figured it out. Not perfectly.
So, one of the things that's interesting to me, and I'd love your perspective on this, is I don't think it's abnormal. It's abnormal to grow a business from, 100,000, or 10,000x, right? Which is what you guys essentially did. That's like, I don't know, one in probably 100 million, 1 in 10 million. It's a big number. But what's less abnormal is to be a leader, come into an organization, and actually be able to stay in that leadership or grow into the leader that's the president of an organization like that. When you think of yourself, like the demands of that job, and to be able to continue to level up, you came in as a VP of Ops. How long did it take for you to become president of the company?
Well, it was about, I became president of Starbucks International, which was founding president of Starbucks International in, I think, 95. So I was there 6 years.
So you've been there. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'd been there 6 years. I increasingly got more responsibilities. Forget the titles. I went from just running the retail stores to had wholesale, human resources. I had all sorts of pieces of the company. And so that kept, more and more things I took on, and I'd have to bring people in to run those different parts of the company. And the better the people I brought in, the easier it was for me. And, I trusted those people until they proved that they weren't worthy of my trust. And I loved them as much going out the door as I loved them coming in the door. And, but, you know, it was always about getting the right people, as Jim Collins says, getting the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus. And that's
Yeah.
what you had to do. And so there were a lot of people that didn't make it, but most of the time they didn't make it because if they didn't make it, I said it's because something I did wrong. You know, I put them in the wrong spots. They weren't up to the level. And the people that just couldn't get there, we would help them leave the organization, but respectfully, you know.
And so,
No surprise. There weren't any surprises.
So what I just heard you say is you basically brought in people that were smarter than you and better than you, and you were good at managing people.
Yeah.
And because of that, you're able to keep growing the business because you were able to be a great manager for people that were talented enough to take the business to the next level.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think my strength was always around organizations and people and getting people to attach to the greater purpose of the organization, which is key. They don't have to all, and they had to subscribe to our values, right? They couldn't be in conflict with our values, but they didn't have to be exactly the same. I didn't want them the same. I didn't want all brown hair, blue eyed. I want blondes and redheads, and I wanted everybody. I wanted a diverse workforce because that adds value. You know, this whole argument about DEI right now, these are just stupid people having a stupid argument. Because DEI, all it really is about, it's not about hiring people that aren't qualified. It's about making sure that you're getting enough different kinds of people in the organization that they all add value in their own ways. And that's what you need to have. You need to have people that think differently, that have had different life experiences. And that's when you really have something.
And so when you start thinking about, accountability, and you start thinking about standards, and I think that especially a company, in order to do what you guys did at Starbucks, need to have high levels of accountability, high levels of standards.
Yeah.
And the values and the vision, I think, can kind of lay that framework of like, hey, here's what we're trying to do, here's how we're looking to do it. And then there's like real life, which is like getting people to actually do that work.
Yeah.
When you start thinking about your approach to that as a leader and as a manager, how did you get people to level up to those standards? What was your approach?
Well, it's going to sound simple, but it's complicated. I had one speech I gave, and it was always about why we were here, that this was a people-centric company, that the business was about people 100%. We weren't serving customers, we were serving human beings. The people that worked in the organization, they weren't employees, they were partners. And we made that work with inside the organization. And so they attached to it. If they don't do that, you got nothing. And so they wanted to do the work. They were the ones figuring out what needed to be done. They were the ones that were saying, here are problems we have to fix. And I'd say, okay, what do you need to be able to fix them? And we'd get the resources in place and we'd go forward. And so it's not, you can take somebody that doesn't have huge experience in what you're doing. And as long as they are willing to work hard, they're willing to learn, they're willing to grow, they're willing to take risks, and they're willing to just give it all that they can, all that it takes, it's amazing what people can accomplish. It's not, I mean, we're not talking here, we're not talking about rocket science here, right? We're not talking about creating a cure for cancer. We're providing coffee to people that want to drink coffee. And so it was all people-centric. We weren't in the people business. We weren't in the coffee business serving people. We were in the people business serving coffee. That's the best way to explain it. And that's what we drove. And I was relentless about that because I knew that would be the success or failure of Starbucks. And if we got that right, then we would make it work. And it holds true today. Nothing has changed. It's still about the people. It has its own unique issues today that they didn't have before. Technology has created some issues, and different things that have happened in the marketplace, but it's still about people.
And so when you start thinking about partnership and the fact that you worked with Howard directly, Tell us a little bit about that relationship. I'd love to hear how it was to work with him. What was the partnership like? What did that look like for you?
Well, like I said, there were three of us. They called us H2O, two Howards and an Oren, and H2O. And Howard and I, we respected each other, but we struggled along the way because I was a really people-centric person, and at that time he was not so much. He was a product-centric person, which is typical of all entrepreneurial organizations. They're focused on their product or the service they're providing. They think that's the business they're in. The minute you hire one human being, you're no longer in that product or service business. You're in the people business. And because that's what will make it work. So Howard and I would have arguments about many things, and sometimes they'd be blowouts, really. People would be, they would back up their chairs sometimes when Howard and I went at it with each other. But we figured it out together, and we trusted each other. That was probably the most important thing. And the three of us, Orrin, I, Howard, we used to meet every Monday night for dinner. And we would talk about our week. Sometimes we'd cry together. Sometimes we'd celebrate together. But we were always on board. We always knew where the other person was on the court. And if we saw something that wasn't right with the other two, we'd speak up. Or with one or the other, there was open dialogue, open conversation. And we wanted that. And we wanted that from our people. We used to have what's called open forums. And that meant, they were basically meetings with all the people in the company. And we did it region by region as we got bigger. But we'd have the people there, and we'd have about 15 to 20 minutes of presentation, what was going on in the company, yada, yada, yada. And then we'd open it up. And any question was okay. Any question.
And did you feel like, by the way, I did something similar in my last company.
Yeah.
Where it was basically it was a town hall, and I'm like, you can ask me any question you want. I'm like, you ask me any question you want. Like, and I wouldn't let him. I'd say you could email it to the head of HR if you want to stay anonymous, but the head of HR will know you're sending it. But anyone can ask any question to me whenever they want. No prep, go for it.
Yeah, and I didn't care. They couldn't hurt my feelings.
Yeah, were people pretty brutal?
Oh, sometimes they were. But they were, most of the time they were productive. So this is in the early days. We were 5 or 6 of us leaders were up on bar stools up in the front, all white people, right? 1 woman and 5 guys or 4 guys, whatever it was at that time. And there was this young black guy. I won't give you his name was Darren. I can remember or Daryl, excuse me. And he stood up. And he says, when am I going to see a face like mine on one of those bar stools? The whole room went silent.
Good for him.
See, that's DEI. He was saying, does a black person have an opportunity here?
Yeah.
That's his question, wasn't it? And God bless Howard Schultz. He got up, he said, Daryl, thank you for that question. And, I don't have an answer for you. Yes, will it happen? Yes. Right. But I could use your help in figuring out how to make that happen. So Daryl became part of a team that really worked on diversity. We added diversity to our guiding principles, and it was important to us. And so we ended up having about half the leadership team was female. We ended up with a significant people of color. They all qualified. We didn't bring them on because they were female or because they were black or whatever color they were. We brought them on because they had the qualities, but they also gave us different life experiences. That's what Daryl gave us, was different life experiences. Growing up in a black community was different than the community that I grew up in. And so it added to the value of the business.
And so when you start to think about, the 2 or 3 things that really stand out to you as far as, and what I'm hearing you say is really, it's around putting people's ideas first.
Yes.
And really holding the organization accountable to its beliefs. I mean, a lot of that is part of servant leadership, but tell us, when you say you're a servant leader or when you believe in servant leadership, what does that mean to you?
Well, first of all, servant leadership is not this mushy, soft, gentle stuff. Servant leadership is about performance. There's no servant leadership without performance. You got to get the job done. So let's understand that. You got to do what you say you're going to do. But three tenets of servant leadership from my perspective are these. There's many more that other people use, but these are my three. Number one, as a leader, your primary responsibility is to grow people as human beings first. Help them become better human beings. Number two, help them become better professional, better at what they do. Right. And number three, help them achieve their own personal goals in life. And that means you need to, all three of those things means you need to be in touch with your people all the time. You need to know where they are. You need to hold them accountable, right? But you need to help them. You need to coach them. You need to do all the things to help them become better human beings and better professionals. And then your job is to help them achieve their goals. And you better know what they want in their lives. Do they mesh up with where we're headed?
And so, you know, when you start to think about how do you, I mean, obviously in a smaller business, you can do that just by interacting with your people and, you know, having one-on-ones and spending time with them and really, you know, putting their, you know, future livelihoods, you know, I guess front and center and then helping them get there, right? Understanding what their purpose is and what their goals are and helping those happen as long as they align to the organization.
Yeah, exactly.
When you, I guess, were you guys able to figure out a way to do that at scale at Starbucks?
Yeah, sure. You know, were we perfect at it? No, but we were damn good at it. And that's how we operated. That's why I say I gave a speech that we're not in the coffee business serving people. We're in the people business serving coffee. I drove that home. I can't tell you how many times I talked about that. I don't care what the question was. I was always going to bring it back to people. And so that drove it with inside the organization. Did we make mistakes? Yeah. Absolutely. You know, that's why they have a union right now in about a few of their stores, but because they weren't paying attention. And so we just kept driving that home. It was difficult to get fired at Starbucks for missing your numbers. Really hard. But it was easy to get fired for messing with the people.
So saying you miss your numbers, but you're doing it, you know, people can see that there's qualitative behavior that's positive.
Yeah.
Then it's like, okay, well, we're going to work with you to improve that.
Yeah, we'll get there with you. And, you know, that's part of it. Now, eventually, you know, if somebody just couldn't get there after 3 years or something like that, you know, we'd try to, but, you know, it wasn't immediate because, you know, stores have their own drum beats. But, you know, the difference between a really top level performing store manager and a low level was about 40%, 20 up, 20 down.
And so when you start to think about, you know, these different tenets of servant leadership, and you look at, you know, especially being, I guess, a publicly traded company, you guys went public, what year was it? 98?
92.
92, excuse me. And so, and you said you got there in what, 89, was it?
Yes, correct.
So 3 years into being there, 3 years before you became president, that you guys went public.
Yeah.
And then how long were you there for in total?
I was there 21 years, including my board time.
So you're there for 21 years. You obviously the company grew over that time frame exponentially.
Right.
It also had moments where and I don't remember when Howard Schultz stepped down as CEO, but there was some pretty like crazy moments where the company, you know, hit some walls as far as growth and had some troubles in the water. Were you there during those times, or was that after your time?
I was there. 2007, 2008. And that's when the downturn came, and Howard was adamant the problem was operations, and I kept saying it isn't. We got an economic problem in the country, and sure enough, that proved to be true. As soon as that went away, companies started growing like leaps and bounds again.
And so when that happened, and you know, obviously, no one can hide for, you know, you can't hide in front of a moving train, right?
No, you can't.
And so, you know, and obviously you've been in business for a long time, so there's been other economic downturns that have affected, you know, what was your perspective as far as like managing through that time period? Was it just hunkering down and getting through it? Like, what was your perspective?
Well, by that time I was getting ready to leave the company. And I believed, you know, we went through a bunch of layoffs. Now, there were some layoffs we were going to have, but you were closing some stores, you're going to have those layoffs. We weren't building as many stores, you're going to have people laid off in those departments. But I was disappointed in what we did, actually. I thought we went too deep. I believe in going deep, by the way. I believe don't want to have a bunch of different layoffs. And but we let people go that added tremendous value to the organization, and we were in a hurry to get our numbers back in line. It was a mistake. And by 2 years later, we were back zooming again. We needed all those people again, so we're out hiring again. Unfortunately, all those people who left, they bled Starbucks. You can't. It's hard to replace people that bleed your organization.
Yeah.
You get that over time, and so, but we made it through it, and then it started to grow again, and of course they were hiring all sorts of people again. But that was just an economic issue in the country that we were dealing with.
Did you think that a lot of that came from being publicly traded, the pressure of being publicly traded, being managed quarter to quarter, or just it was just like, hey, look, this isn't working, the numbers aren't there.
I think our reaction was more about the public markets.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
We reacted. That's why the layoffs, no question about that. And we shouldn't have. We should have just said, we're hanging tight. Yeah, we're going to have some layoffs. We're going to hang tight. But we weren't, here's a company without debt. We're throwing off tremendous amounts of cash. We did not have an economic problem. I mean, yeah, was there a downturn results? Yeah, but we weren't going to go broke. That was not going to happen.
So when you look at that response, right, and I think this is one of the issues with the public markets is it's really hard to manage a business 12 weeks at a time, right? Because that's nothing. You snap your fingers.
That's not how it works.
No, any decision you make is not going to have an effect 12 weeks from now. No. It's going to affect 12 months from now, especially if you're flying an aircraft carrier. It's going to be maybe a year and a half from now before you see the effects of that, right?
Yeah.
And so when you look at companies like Costco, for instance, and you mentioned that was one of your connections into that. I mean, I think they've done a pretty amazing job.
They're one of my favorite. Well, I knew both founders, Jim Senegal and Jeff Brobman. And Jim Senegal said, look, because he had lots of pressure to reduce wages. They were paying really good wages and to do other things. And he did just what, and we learned from him. He just said, you don't like the stock, sell it. Now you got to perform over time, right? And I agree with that. I think there's way too much attention paid to short-term public results.
Right.
I mean, and we talk about it all the time, but we can't seem to get ourselves off the drug. And
it's kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, because it's not the way businesses grow. There is no business that just gets on a track and just grows like that exponentially forever.
We go like not realistic.
This. And what companies do is try to manipulate it so that you don't see that. Right?
Yeah.
And that's what happens in most organizations. Do you think that every public company out there, that those that are performing well, that their results are really going like that? No. What they're doing, they're going through layoffs to cut costs, and they hire people. I mean, it's that kind of thing. And it's overreaction to the pressure in public markets.
Yeah. So what if you had to redesign the public markets in a way that you think would be best for the companies? How would you do that? What would be the change you would make?
I would not have quarterly results.
Yearly results.
Yeah, I'd have yearly results.
So, interesting.
With dialogue in between, right? Here's what's working, here's stuff not working, but over the years period of time, this is what it's going to look like.
Interesting. Okay. And so when you start to think of companies out there right now that you
inside the organization, internally, yes.
Oh, yeah. Different story.
A different story. That's different, but because all you do when you pressure your people, you start to do stupid little things. One time we weren't going to make our quarter. So what did we do? We cut out sending supplies to our stores. Right? I mean, really? I mean, does that make sense? And then we cut back hours for our supervisor. I mean, that blew everything up. You can't do that. And then now all of a sudden trust breaks down in your organization. Now you have to get results. So I'm a performance guy. So if you set out a plan to produce your plan internally, and let's just say that's what you tell the public markets. This is where we think, this is the range. First of all, it should never be a number. This is the range. And the range could be plus or minus 10%, right? And you look at results over long, protracted periods of time.
And so when you start to think of, and Charlie Munger says this, right? You show me someone's incentives, I'll show you their behavior, right?
Yeah, right.
And so
Yeah.
we're in a place where the incentives are not aligned to the behaviors we want for long term.
Yeah.
I have a mentor who calls it long termism. He's like,
Yeah.
you do not have, the public markets are not aligned to long term thinking. They're
No.
aligned to quarterly thinking, which affects the ability for companies to make good
Hell, they're
long
not
term
even
decisions.
aligned to quarterly thinking. All the analysts are all trying to get information during that quarter, week to week, month to month. They, the quarter, that just something out there. That's a number that everybody's come up with. But the analysts are always trying to dig in and find out what happened last week, and then they'll make judgments based on last week.
What another way of solving it might be that you can't buy or sell the stock except once a year. You got to hold it for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, that would be even better, that you got to hold. Yeah, I mean, the biggest, I think, one of the big mistakes we made is the 1 year deal. That if you hold stock for 1 year, it becomes capital gains. Try 5 years.
Yeah, but I think that's a pretty good idea. Bump it out to 5 years, like completely disincentivize trading, completely disincentivize a lot of that behavior.
Yeah, exactly.
That's interesting. Or tax them for it if they want to do it, disincentivize that way.
Yeah.
So when you start to think of the leaders that you saw come up in your business, or the best leaders that grew, like what was the qualities about them that made them the best leaders?
Well, you'll hear the words repeated in lots of other places. Authenticity. They're real people. They're no bullshit. They tell the truth. They don't not necessarily try to scare people, but they tell people the truth. They give them the information. Vulnerability. They're not trying to be heroes, right? If they make a mistake, they step up and own the mistake. They take the bullets before they let their people take the bullets. Understanding that it's 24/7. Your people need you 24/7. You got to be prepared for that. It doesn't mean you don't take time off and you don't take a vacation. You don't have to regenerate yourself. You do, but your people need you sometimes when you got to be prepared to be there all the time, so to speak. And my job, I used to say, the night job was the business. My day job was the people.
Love that.
That's what I believe, and it takes those kind of things. I mean, we had some incredible leaders at Starbucks. We had some bad ones too, but we had some incredible leaders, and they were always the ones that gave it their all. They were out visiting the roasting plants at midnight, to talk to the people that were working in that shift. They were the ones that were traveling and in the stores all the time. I mean, I spent most of my time out on the road, being in the stores, because that's where I was going to learn. Now, I had things to do at the support center too, and I had to have time for that. But where I really learned the most was out in the field.
When I saw somewhere that are you 80 years old? Is that correct?
I'm 80. I just turned 80. Yeah.
So if you get a time machine and you got to go and talk to yourself when you were, call it 30 and 40 years old, what would have been the best piece of advice you would have given yourself?
Patience pays. Sometimes you have to have patience. Sometimes it doesn't come when you want it to come. And sometimes you have to have patience with your people. Still have to hold them accountable, but you got to have patience. And so patience pays. I was too A personality then. I'm still A personality, but I'm still driven and I'm still energetic and all that kind of stuff. But I'd go back further. It's 30 and 40, you're pretty well formed. But by the time I got to Starbucks, I knew who I was, right? I knew what mattered to me. I knew that it was about the people. I was a conscious competent in terms of servant leadership. I understood servant leadership and I could teach it. But I would go back to when I was in my teens and early 20s. To number one, understand what my values were. What were the driving values in my life? What really mattered? What did I want to hold dear? And so I didn't know that. I didn't know Howard at 20. I really didn't. I was just Howie being Howie, whatever that was. The other thing, I would have set goals early in my life. measurable goals, and I holding myself accountable, knowing that I wouldn't achieve everything, but I'd have very specific and measurable goals in all facets of my life, from spirituality to economic to personal growth. To health, whatever it was, I'd have goals laid out for myself, 1, 3, and 5-year goals. And then I would have a mission statement for my life. What is it I want to leave behind? Now, it wasn't until my late 20s that a lot of that came to bear, where I created a document that I still have today. I've had it for 50 years. Over 50 years. It's a picture of Howard in 50 words or less. Has my mission statement, my 8 to 10 values, most important values, and what I call my 6 Ps, and how I want to live my life. And that's how I live my life. And I gave you my mission statement. Every day I want to nurture and inspire the human spirit, beginning with myself first and then for others. And I plagiarized a lot of that from work we had done at Starbucks. But when I heard those words, I said, that's me. And then I have my 8 to 10 core values. First one being honesty, and then you have to take those values and you have to define what they mean to you. So everybody in your audience, if I asked them, I'd say, are you honest? They'd probably all say, yeah, I'm honest. Then I'd say, okay, what would you tell a white lie about? Everybody has told a white lie. There's nobody that hasn't, nobody is perfectly honest, I don't care who you are. And, so I have to define what honesty means to me, and then I have to define all my values. My 6 Ps are these. Everything I do in my life has to have a purpose greater than myself. Okay, it has to be bigger than me, and primarily it's about serving people. The second P is passion. If I'm going to have a purpose greater than myself, then I damn well better be passionate about it. All my energy going into it, everything, it's about me. And people is my passion. My greater purpose is growing people, helping people be all they can be, and I am passionate about that. The third P is persistence. Nothing happens in these rivers we call our lives that without being persistent. There are rocks in the river. Some of those rocks are below the waterline. We don't see them. We smack into them, and we've got to figure out how to get through them, over under them, or blow them up. Some rocks sit above the waterline. We see them out there on the horizon. For some damn reason, we hit them anyway. Why, I don't know, but we do. And then there's those rocks that our parents, our coaches, our teachers, our bosses tell us about, and we ignore their advice. And we hit them. So we still got to get through all those rocks. It's just the way that it is. So persistence matters. I've never met any entrepreneur that I couldn't define by that word, persistence. That's what they are. They are persistent. That was Howard Schultz in spades. And then patience. Patience pays. It's you got to have, number one person you got to have patience with is yourself. All those goals you set for yourself, they may not all come in the time frame you want, but you got to stay with them, stay on them. And the people that you have in your organization won't all attach at the same time. So you have to encourage them, you have to push, you have to coach to get them to attach and to do all they can do, but you got to have a little patience along the way. So patience is important. Then the fifth P is performance. Performance matters in this world we live in. We're getting measured all the time. If you're married or you have a significant other in your life, trust me, your performance is being evaluated every day. Leave your socks on the floor, leave the toilet seat up, right? Don't take the garbage out. Your performance is being evaluated. If you have children and you promise to go to their soccer game and you don't show up, your performance is being evaluated. If you commit to have a monogamous relationship with your significant other and you don't, then you're not living up to performance. And so we're getting measured all the time. And when you commit to your team at work or your bosses or whoever their organization to turn in the performance, and you better damn well do what you say you're going to do. Or you better tell your boss or tell your people why you're not going to get there. It's all right to miss things, but don't surprise people. Tell them where you are all the time. So performance matters. You got to get the job done. And then the sixth P, the most important P, is people. There is nothing any of us will do in our lives that isn't about serving others, isn't about serving people. Doctor, lawyer, fire chief, salesperson, architect, garbage collector, widget maker. Widget maker makes a widget that goes into a printing press that gets sold to a publishing company that produces a magazine or newspaper that gets delivered to somebody's home to inform or entertain them. The lowly widget maker has, is about serving people. Right?
I love it.
And you have to figure out how to connect yourself to those things that you do. So I try to live my life by that. And so you asked me what I would do. I would have done that work when I was 20.
I love that. Howard, what a great show, man. Appreciate you coming on here today. We're about to wrap up. I want to be respectful of your time, but we have 2 parts left. Number one is I'd love to point people in the right direction to connect with you, learn more about you and your books, and more in your background. And I don't know if you're still doing a lot of public speaking, but they can come and see you.
Let me give you so anybody can contact me at any time. I'm slow to get back sometimes because I'm slowing down a little bit, but my email address is HB, my initials, HB at howardbehar.com. And my cell phone number is 206-972-7776. I take anybody's call. I want to bitch about your boss, I'll listen. Okay. I'm not the answer man, but I will listen. Okay. And I'll try to help if I can.
Amazing. Well, you guys, you better call them with some good questions if you're going to call them. All right. Well, with that said, we do have the greatness question here. Would love to get to our greatness question. Are you ready for that, Howard?
Sure. I hope.
All right, let's do it. What is the number one barrier to creating greatness that you've overcome in your life, and how did you overcome it?
My own insecurities. I was a guy without a college degree, and I'd work in companies that were hiring MBAs, and I thought MBAs knew everything. And so that I'd go home at night and say, God, we just hired somebody who just came out of Stanford. God, they're a lot smarter than I am. It took me a long time to realize it just wasn't true, and that I had a lot to offer, and I just had to do the work and to live up to the things that I was good at. And so getting over my own insecurities, I always used to think I was a fake, but, over time, I got to realize that I did have good qualities and I did have good experience, and I continued to learn and to grow. And so when I overcame that, kind of all the barriers fell away.
Love that. Howard, thank you so much for coming on The Greatness Machine. Appreciate all your lifelong lessons and the stories from Starbucks, and just you as just being an amazing servant leader. It's really been an honor to have you on the show today.
Darius, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, guys, you need to go out there, share this. This is like the definition of learning from someone that's been there and done that. I'm talking to the audience right now. We as leaders, we share good information. So please go ahead and share this podcast with anyone that needs to hear it. And that's going to be all you leaders out there. And until next time, peace out. We love you. You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen, if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on, so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. Leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers. And after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind the scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything, but it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one.
She's my lover.